if you have inequality, you're going to have conflict, and you're also going to have this new phenomenon that hasn't been recognized in the past, and that's called psychosocial stress. And that's this relationship that, for example, I'll give you an example, there's absolute deprivation and relative deprivation. We don't understand what absolute deprivation means. It's obviously, if you're poor, you don't get your needs met, and you don't eat well, you might be susceptible to very toxic environments from your living conditions, etc. We understand that. Relative deprivation is actually much more insidious because it has to do with our social nature and the way we perceive ourselves in the social hierarchy. We are deeply social organisms. It's built right into our evolutionary psychology. And when we see other people that are doing better or have a higher class status, which is exactly what the economy creates with this wealth division that's inherent, it messes us up. It messes us up really badly. And this has been proven through a number of social research analysis and public health for the past, I'd say, 50 years. It's fairly new, though. And if you're, say, for example, and I'll bring this to the class war concept. If I put a gun to someone's head and shoot somebody, it's an act of violence. Say they're 50 years old and the life expectancy is 84. That means 34 years have been taken from them in a broad, theoretical sense. However, if I take another person and I stick them in a poverty-stricken environment and they develop heart disease, which has been known to have an absolute direct link statistically to low socioeconomic status, which isn't actually absolute. It's actually these measurements have been done where if you're just in the existence of low socioeconomic status, absolute deprivation aside, the relative deprivation, the stress of that, the way you think about yourself has incredibly inhibiting effects on the way your body and your mind works. And you will develop high stress levels, you'll develop cardiac problems, you'll develop heart disease problems very predictably in certain cases. And what if that person that has that heart disease dies at the age of 50 again, when they could have lived possibly to 84? Because they are in a position of poverty and low socioeconomic status, meaning, of course, that they don't have to be there. And this is the argument of the movement. There's no reason for anyone to be in poverty. There's no reason to have these massive wealth gaps. This is a traditional overflow. If it's not necessary, if it can be, it's like someone who's dying on the street of dehydration. You hold a bottle of water over their head. Is the fact that you don't give them that water, even though it has nothing to do with you, if you have plenty of access to water, is that an act of violence? Yes, it is. It's like someone polluting a pool of water, a water supply, and it goes in 15 years later, it goes to the town, and people get cancer. They don't know why they've gotten the cancer because they don't know the causality. But is that an act of violence if you did that? Of course it is. This is structural violence. And structural violence, in the broad scheme, which has been through public health research, has killed more people than every dictator combined. It's killed more people than every war combined in the past 200 years since these studies became evident. Gandhi knew this immediately. He said, poverty is the worst form of violence. It's a great intuition. Martin Luther King talked about this all the time. Before his death, all he wanted to see was equal income. He said, let's stabilize. This is economic bigotry, basically. Economic bigotry built right into the social system because of market capitalism's inherent propensity to create inequality, which people love it if you believe in social Darwinism, because everyone walks around reinforced to think that they're better than everyone else because of all their property and status. It is one of the most caustic things you can possibly do to a society, is to generate inequality when it comes to public health.
How can you get people past this blind spot and thinking that these unfortunate instances are just inevitable?
I hope I explained fairly well that the scarcity-driven worldview, coupled with narrow self-interest, which always gravitates towards competitive advantage, will always push that forward. Every act of commerce is an act of competition in some way. If you take a job, I want to get the highest possible rate from my employer. He wants to get the lowest possible rate. I'm just something else that he has to buy. If I engage in commerce, I want to pay, and that's why negotiation exists. The very term negotiation implies a type of conflict and warfare to get the lowest price for something that you want to buy. This kernel seed mentality of market competition is what has no equilibrium. It can't, because in part you will always lead to power consolidations and advantage, as with the state or mafia. That's probably the best word that I would use to describe what happens in this system. And again, I don't look at the mafia as something that is an amoral anomaly of this. I say that is exactly just a variation of everything that's happening. It only happens to exist outside of what we consider to be the frame of this playing field. If you look at I'll say it this way. If you look at microeconomic theory, like John Nash and the Nash equilibrium and all these guys that came forward in the 20th century that really investigated capitalism, they will use only one theory for their perspective. It's called game theory. And game theory is just that. If you're looking in a competitive environment, you're playing poker. You are going to win and some are going to lose. And within that climate, you can't have social equality. You can't have any type of equality, actually.
Talk about where